Dublin's oldest chip shop has a surprising secret. Its potatoes are British.
It'd be like having a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand as opposed to France. I know everybody thinks of wine with regards to the French, but the Australian, New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs are very, very good.
Now the company's supply is at risk due to a stalemate in trade negotiations between the UK and the European Union.
They haven't resolved anything. There's a lot of speculation, so there's a lot of kind of concern, especially in the industry that's so big.
The UK is scheduled to leave the EU single market and customs union at the end of the year. Without a deal in place, trade will be subject to World Trade Organization rules. That would mean longer border checks and higher tariffs for $1 trillion in annual trade. Negotiators are meeting in Brussels this week to see if they can decide a last-ditch deal.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Good morning.
Significant differences remain on the three critical issues: level playing field, governance, and fisheries. Both sides underline that no agreement is feasible if these issues are not solved.
Questioned by reporters in Brussels, the UK's chief negotiator, David Frost, had this to say.
We're still working very hard.
According to the Independent Office of Budget Responsibility, the UK economy would be 6% smaller if it crashes out of the EU without a trade deal. That means a major crunch for chip shops and many other businesses on either side of the border. Paolo Montecillo, TRT World.
Jonathan Portis joins us now from London. He's a Professor of Economics and Public Policy at King's College. He's also a Senior Fellow at UK in a Changing Europe. Welcome back to the program, Jonathan. Now, this has been described as the final push in a bid to ink a trade deal between the EU and the UK. But it's interesting because unlike negotiations over the previous withdrawal agreement, neither side is claiming that really there's reason to be optimistic about the progress that's being made. What's your view? Do you think we'll see some sort of a deal reached between the two sides before the end of the year?
Like many of my colleagues, I think it's pretty a sort of a waste of time, frankly, to speculate. The truth is, Boris Johnson has to make up his mind. He hasn't made up his mind. That's been the case for the last 6 months. We're now pushing up against the deadline, but the fundamentals of this equation really have not changed in some time. The British government, and particularly the Prime Minister, has to decide whether he wants to make the concessions that are necessary to reach the deal. We all know what the deal looks like at this point. It's simply a question of whether he wants to sign it.
Now, part of these concessions involve, as we know, the issue of fishing rights, which has been a point of contention for some time now. But it's emerging that the issue of this so-called level playing field is also an obstacle to a deal. Now, this involves the conditions that the UK must accept in order to export to the EU market. What do these conditions involve? Do we know about that at all?
They're essentially the rules that are designed to preserve fair competition within the EU, minimum standards on environmental issues, labour rights, competition issues, state aid, that's subsidies to industries and so on. Now, both sides agree that once the UK leaves the EU, the UK clearly doesn't have to follow the rules exactly. However, the EU is saying that as a condition for tariff-free trade between the two countries, the UK at least has to make some commitments in principle to maintaining broadly the same standards and not going backwards on those standards. And exactly what those commitments amount to and how they would be enforced, that is the crucial area of contention here, because it's a trade-off for the UK between maintaining some degree of access to the EU markets, albeit with more restrictions than now, but accepting some continuing restrictions on exactly how we make domestic policy, or deciding actually we'd rather be completely free to do exactly what we like, but face tariffs on our goods going to the EU.
Now, if no deal is agreed on and ratified by the end of the year, the UK and the EU will trade under rules outlined by the World Trade Organization. Now, both sides could then technically introduce tariffs or import duties on each other's goods. How likely is that, though, that either side will penalise the other?
Well, it's not a question of penalisation. There will be, if there's no deal, there will be tariffs. That's not either side penalising the other. That's just the law, right? That has to happen. That is what no deal means. Okay.
So if that does happen then, will that significantly disadvantage one side more than the other?
No. Trade benefits both sides, and tariffs, and these tariffs would be pretty much symmetric, since we'd be pretty much applying more or less the same tariffs to EU goods they apply to ours. Trade benefits both sides, so both sides would lose as a consequence of tariffs. Who would lose more? Well, the EU exports more to us than we export to them, but on the other hand, our trade, both exports and imports, are much larger proportion of our overall trade than is the case for the EU with respect to us, because obviously they're much bigger. So proportionally, the UK would suffer considerably more. But it's important to remember this is lose-lose. Both sides lose. The UK loses more. But that doesn't mean that the Europeans win. They lose too. The other thing it's important to remember, as you flashed up there, is that deal or no deal, there will be customs checks. There will be border controls. There will be new regulatory barriers between the UK and the EU. That's true even if there is a deal. So even if there is a deal, there is going to be significant new trade barriers between the UK and the EU and significant disruption to trade. That is going to happen either way.
There's also this other obstacle to a trade agreement, and that's Boris Johnson's proposed legislation to override parts of the withdrawal agreement that both sides had agreed on before this point. Now, the EU says even if they do manage to agree on a trade deal, that won't be valid unless the withdrawal deal is respected in its original form. Do you think they'll get over that? Will Boris Johnson relent and review that proposed legislation?
Well, I think the UK government has already said what almost all of us expected it to say, which is that basically if there's a deal, those clauses will be dropped. And the EU has already said in very clear terms that unless those clauses are dropped, there isn't going to be a deal. So there's a bit of choreography, who does exactly what, when, to be sorted out. But frankly, I don't think this is much of a really much of a blocker. If there is a deal, they will find a way of getting rid of these clauses in a face-saving way for both sides. If there isn't a deal, then these clauses make the prospect of some degree of confrontation, particularly in Northern Ireland, much greater. So it's not that it doesn't matter. This is potentially a very big risk. But if there is a deal, that issue will probably go away. If there's no deal, it's going to make no deal much worse than it already is.
Okay, and we understand that both sides are continuing to negotiate as we speak. Jonathan Porters in London, thank you again for joining us on the program.